Let me tell you a story. You come upon the bank of a river in full flood. Caught in the current are two people. One, you recognize as your spouse. The other, a renowned surgeon who has just discovered a cure for cancer, but who, you know, has yet to put the cure down to paper. There is only one life ring. You can only save one of them. Who do you save? Most of us, given this decision, would save our spouse. But according to the moral philosophy of Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, this decision would be an immoral one. Bentham and Mill were two of the founding fathers of the moral theory known as utilitarianism, the view that the moral act in any given situation is the action which produces the greatest good, quantified as presence of pleasure and absence of pain, for the greatest number of people. The utilitarian answer to the problem which opened this discussion is a simple one. A treatment for cancer will help many more people than your spouse being alive, and so the moral act in this circumstance is to sacrifice your spouse in order to save the doctor. However, many people find this to be a very troubling answer, as it suggests that following our natural inclination to protect those near and dear to us could lead us to act immorally. For this reason, thought experiments like this one have been argued as a reason to reject or modify the utilitarian philosophy, an argument known as the demandingness objection to utilitarianism. Now, this is all well and interesting, but what do these high philosophical concepts have to do with the NBC TV show The Good Place? And more importantly, what does that have to do with capitalism? Before we go any further, it should go without saying that this essay is going to have spoilers for the whole of The Good Place, so if you haven't seen it yet, and you're worried about such things, maybe give this one a pass. The Good Place is a fantasy comedy, according to its Wikipedia page, debuting in 2016 and running till 2020. The show follows a crew of lovable misfits who find themselves dead and arriving, supposedly, in The Good Place, a kind of utopian afterlife. Over a series of dazzling twists and tender character moments, the crew must grapple with questions of morality, ethics, how to be better people themselves, and ultimately, how to build a fair afterlife to judge humanity. One of the central characters is Chidi Anagonye, an adorable nerd and professor of ethics and moral philosophy, who uses his knowledge of an array of moral theories to tutor our heroine, Eleanor Shellstrop, in how to become a better person. A significant portion of the show's runtime is spent on Chidi's discussion of moral theories and explanations of the arguments around them, including a particularly gruesome portrayal of the famous trolley problem of utilitarianism. Normally, I don't find it particularly worthwhile to subject mainstream media to philosophical analysis, but given this show goes to such lengths to flash its philosophical credentials before you, I feel justified indulging just this once. For the most part, the show does a reasonably good job of exploring its moral philosophy themes. Let's take the show's treatment of the demandingness objection as an example. The core conceit of the show is that your fate in the afterlife depends on how many points you score in life, with positive points awarded for good deeds and negative points for bad deeds. The more points, the better or worse the deed is. A high enough score gets you access to the utopian good place, lower scores send you to eternal torment in hell, or the bad place. At the surface level, there seems to be a basically utilitarian theory of moral actions in this life, with a very Kantian approach to judgment in the next. A major twist comes in Chapter 36, Episode 10 of the third season, where a visit to the afterlife accountants reveals that no one has earned enough points to get into the good place in the past 521 years. Why? Well, I'll let Michael do the explaining.
Your Honor, I once stood in front of you and said I thought there was something wrong with the point system. I finally know what it is. Life now is so complicated. It's impossible for anyone to be good enough for the good place. I know you don't like to learn too much about life on Earth to remain impartial, but these days just buying a tomato at a grocery store means that you are unwittingly supporting toxic pesticides, exploiting labor, contributing to global warming. Humans think that they're making one choice, but they're actually making dozens of choices they don't even know they're making.
Now, on the one hand, I absolutely love this scene because it captures something about the demandingness of morality which is often overlooked, at least from my experience, in the philosophical literature, namely the role of modern late-stage capitalism on the morality of our actions. In a thought experiment, we can isolate a single action with clear, defined consequences and make a moral judgment about that act. However, in the real world, every action we take occurs in a web of systems of power and exploitation, and so our actions will often have morally significant consequences that we do not, or even could not, consider. If you buy a new phone, you're thinking about how that phone will improve your life. You're not thinking about how buying that phone makes you complicit in child slavery in cobalt mines in the global south. When you buy a nice cotton shirt, you're thinking about how your old clothes are wearing out. You're not thinking about how cotton production is so water intensive that it causes severe drought in the places where it's cultivated. When you buy fruit in the supermarket, you're thinking about how it's healthier than buying a sausage roll, but probably not thinking about how the carbon footprint that brought that fruit to your local Tesco. So, of course, as the world has become more industrialised and more interconnected, and especially as capitalism has led to every purchase contributing towards the exploitation of workers, and colonialism has guaranteed that luxuries we take for granted are built on the backs of genocide, it becomes harder and harder for individuals to live morally commendable lives at the abstracted level of divine judgment. Unfortunately, the show seems to draw the wrong conclusion from this revelation. Rather than considering this as evidence of a fundamental moral problem with the systems that exist in our society, the show assumes that the problem lies in how we judge the morality of individual acts. It does not blame capitalism, instead it blames the afterlife. From here, it's only downhill when it comes to the morality of the show. The ultimate resolution offered for the moral problems raised is to create an afterlife with a kind of purgatory, where people have the chance to grow and develop into more moral people once they have died. This is a mildly satisfying ending to the systemic questions raised about the afterlife specifically. At least this show does come to the conclusion that eternal torment is morally unjustifiable, with the bad place ultimately being abolished. But the show doesn't address questions like who has the right to determine what is moral, or judge people for reaching or failing to reach that morality. But then again, these are maybe nuances beyond the scope of a comedy. However, even with all this, one must still ask, if the show only wanted to talk about the morality of the afterlife, why did it raise the issues of systems of immorality in the first place? Why does Michael talk about how buying a tomato contributes to global warming and labour exploitation, rather than, say, just focusing on more distractions in modern life from engaging in moral activity? If this deeply moral question of these systems of exploitation was never going to be properly resolved, the show raises a very, very important question. Is it possible to be moral, in any objective sense, in a society built on immoral systems of exploitation and violence? But it refuses to answer that question, choosing instead to sidestep it entirely. Instead of asking us to think about the actual morality of the social systems we inhabit, the show just asks us not to judge ourselves or others too harshly for participating in those systems. And, in some ways, that is a useful message for particularly those in more active leftist or progressive circles to hear. Beating yourself up over being part of a system that's non-voluntary is not good praxis, and it is just going to sap your motivation to actually make a difference in the world. Unfortunately, it also obfuscates the much more important systemic critique. At no point is the show willing to ask, should the human world be like this? Is it right that you can't even live your life without engaging in all manner of immoral, harmful, and exploitative systems? These questions are hastily brushed away in favour of the liberal canon. Capitalism and all the exploitation it comes with are just facts of life. Nothing you can do about it. And the only thing we are allowed to concern ourselves with is how much or how little we should judge individual people for participating in systems that they cannot help but participate in. This is why I describe the morality of The Good Place as disappointing. The show goes to great lengths to wave around its moral credentials, and it raises a really, really important moral insight. If we take our ethical theories seriously, it is not possible to live morally under modern late-stage capitalism. But rather than interrogating this insight further, or offering answers to the problems it raises, the show just sidesteps the issue, retreating to the comfortable mediocrity of a deeply immoral world with a purgatory-driven afterlife as the best possible moral order. I'm not surprised, I'm just disappointed. I never found the demandingness objection particularly convincing. It seems to me that it often comes from a place of wanting to believe that our actions are, at the end of the day, basically moral. But to me, that's doing moral philosophy backwards. The point of a moral philosophy is to challenge you to be better, not to pat you on the back for doing the bare minimum. In the same way, I don't find the morality of The Good Place very convincing either. If we recognise that our society is built on fundamentally immoral systems, that we can't even buy a tomato without participating in worker exploitation and destruction of the only planet we call home, building a purgatory-driven afterlife is not a solution to the moral problem in any meaningful way. It might save people from eternal damnation relative to the system they previously had in place, but it does nothing to prevent the suffering caused by these systems of injustice on Earth. I do believe that morality should be demanding. It should force us to be better. And when we turn our lens of moral reasoning on the society we have built and find it desperately wanting, the solution is not to look for purgatory or hope of doing better in the next life. The solution is to challenge, break down, and replace those very systems of injustice, exploitation, and violence at the heart of our society in this one. Modern late-stage capitalism, with its patriarchy, cisnormativity, heteronormativity, white supremacy, ableism, it is a fundamentally immoral system. This much the show concedes, even if it wouldn't admit it in as many words, but where The Good Place asks us to look away from the problem, sidestepping into navel-gazing about an appropriate afterlife, morality demands that we look this issue square in the face and do something about it. If we are to satisfy the needs of morality, we must build a society in which people are able to act morally. And that means a society without exploitation, a society without hierarchies of violence, a society which is based not around the profit motive and the will to power, but around the satisfaction of human need and the facilitation of human flourishing as the driving principle of social, political, and economic organisation. In other words, the only moral order for society is a socialist one. That's all for this video. I realise this is a bit different to what I normally do. I don't normally do this kind of media criticism, but this was bugging me, and although I understand why a lot of socialists don't enjoy these kind of moralised arguments, I do think that it is important to recognise that if we are to take moral philosophy, ethical reasoning seriously, then that has important repercussions for society, and this was just a really easy way to talk about it because The Good Place gets that so wrong. I hope this has been fun. I've not been making enough videos to really have a regular content to get back to, but I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Grace and peace.